The European Under-19 Championship is kicking off, and I've not seen much coverage of it, but it's a tournament that's filled with very talented prospects. I want to run through some of them. So these are going to be the top prospects from every nation, along with some prospects that are going a bit under the radar who I'm a pretty big fan of. This is Marco, Stage of Soccer, and excited to get into it. Ivan Fresnada is by far the top prospect of this tournament. The Spanish right-back from Real Valladolid has really started to make waves at an extremely young age. He's a player who's linked with a lot of top clubs around the world, and it's easy to understand why. He's a player who's very strong defensively, especially for his age at right-back. In La Liga, he was holding his own against the likes of Vinicius, and really started to show his strength at that position. Going forward, it's a bit more of a mixed bag, but keep in mind, he was on a relegated team. That actually might end up helping him a bit later, I'll get into that. But he has a pretty good cross on him. He wasn't able to get too many assists, but the talent seems to be there. He looks like a good dribbler. And athletically, he's not the fastest in the world, but he was able to defend Vinicius very well. He looks like he has everything you need to be a top-class right-back, and a lot of the top clubs in the world are keeping an eye on him. And they should be able to get him relatively cheaply. Since his team was relegated, his release clause has actually dropped to around 20 million, and he could be a very good buy for a lot of clubs around the world. I'm expecting he's going to be scouted, and I'm expecting him to get a pretty big move by the end of this tournament. Giacomo Faticanti is a really solid defensive midfield prospect from Roma. He'll be a big part of this Italian team, and he looks to be captaining the side. Giacomo is a very strong defensive player with good work rate and good defensive instincts to help him break up counterattacks. He's also very strong against the press, doing a great job at playing out of it, and it seems like he's very good on the ball. He's been compared to Daniele Del Rossi, one of Roma's legends, and I understand that comparison completely. He looks like a really solid player and somebody to keep an eye on. In an Italian team that hasn't had too many star players emerge, he looks like he could be one of the next great players for Italy. Another good player for Italy is Luca D'Andrea, one of two Lucas on the wing for Italy. I've already talked about the previous one a little bit. So D'Andrea is a right winger who's very good at cutting inside to his left foot. His right foot isn't that bad either. I've seen him put in some good crosses with it, but the main thing you want him to do is be a goal threat by cutting in onto that left foot. He's already picked up a goal this tournament, and I think he can continue that form. He's playing for Sassuolo. Maybe he can follow in Berardi's footsteps, become a very strong winger there. And I think he's a pretty good player, good at taking on guys. And just the main thing for him is that goal threat, cutting in on his left foot. Attackers in that spot are pretty rare. Having good left-footed attackers is something that's not easy to come by. And because of that, I think I could see him getting a move abroad or maybe to a top Italian club in a relatively recent future. I think he's somebody to keep your eye on. Goncalo Esteves looks like a really solid right-back prospect for Portugal. The Sporting player is very smooth on the ball. That's just the only word I can use to describe it. Really good going forward, good in possession and taking on players. Now defensively, it's hard to really gauge because he's been very dominant at the youth level. He's been one of the best players for Portugal in their qualifying campaign. But he actually spent some time on loan this season, away from Sporting, and in that he really wasn't doing too well. It was an unsuccessful loan. He got dropped and returned to Sporting not soon into his loan spell. But I think that'd be pretty harsh to hold that against him, considering he's one of the few players in this entire tournament who's really consistently played senior action, especially in a top league in Portugal. So I'm not going to hold that against him too much. And with how good he's looked on the ball, especially in these youth competitions, he's still a really talented prospect and someone to look out for Portugal. Staying in Portugal and staying with Sporting, actually, we have Rodrigo Ribeiro, a really talented striker who I think is a perfect player for the modern game. I talk a lot about old school number 9s like Erling Haaland and how good they are with his goal scoring. Ribeiro's not bad at his goal scoring at all, but the main thing with him is how good he is technically. I was mentioning before with wingers like Luca D'Andrea how important it can be to have somebody cutting in onto that left foot or on the other side on the right foot for wingers to be a big goal scoring threat. We've seen that with Mohamed Salah, especially with guys like that. And when you have a winger who's a really good goal-scoring threat, a lot of times it can be beneficial to have a striker who's really good at dropping into the midfield, combining there in possession, and threading in good passes to those wingers. And Ribeiro, he does that very well. He's an extremely technical player. He's good at combining, and I think his creativity is really going to shine for Portugal. We'll get into a couple more players for them later, but he's going to be really helping out this team. And on top of that, he's a big striker, good technically, his hold-up play is solid, his finishing has been good. He's actually one of the younger players in this tournament. He's a 2005 player as opposed to most of the guys I've talked about who are going to be 2004s. And he's somebody who I think could be a really talented prospect for Portugal. And Rodrigo Ribeiro is somebody to keep your eye on. Next, there's Milosz Matyski, a very talented center back out of Poland. Matyski is a very good athlete. He's a fast player, able to keep up with some pacey wingers, something that's proved to be crucial for teams nowadays, especially at the highest level. In addition, though, he's actually 6'3". He's a very big player, good aerially. He can compete with some of the toughest strikers. In addition, he's got good defensive instincts. He's not just a talented athlete, he's a talented defender. And cherry on top is that he's good on the ball. He's talented at bringing the ball forward, good against the press, and he just has everything you need to be a very strong defender. He has no holes in his game, and just when you have all of those attributes, big clubs are going to come calling. So now, it should be said that he is only playing in the Polish league. Again, being able to play senior games at all, that's huge in a tournament like this with players as young as this. But he hasn't been pushed too hard, so this tournament's actually going to be a really good test for him. I'm going to be keeping my eye on Matyski to see how good he can be, because if he is as advertised, he could be a really talented center back, might have one of the highest ceilings out of any of the players at this tournament. Stefanos Tzimas is both the youngest and the best player on this Greek team. He's one of the few 2006 born players at this tournament, and he deserves to be here. His finishing and his athleticism are his main two strengths. His finishing is very strong. He's good at putting the ball in the back of the net. He's 6 foot tall, so he's good in the air as well. But in addition, he's a very fast player, and he uses that speed and his movement very well. He's good at getting behind defenses. And in addition, he just knows how to be in the right place at the right time to score goals, good poacher instincts, and he looks like a very talented striker prospect. Now, his technical ability does need to come along some. It's not like he's a player like Ribeiro, but again, he's one of the youngest players at this tournament. He has time to get better in that department, and just with his athleticism and finishing alone, there's a lot to be excited about, and he seems like a really good prospect for Greece. Those are the players who I feel like are more objectively the top prospects of this tournament. It's not a guarantee that they'll be the best player, but they're really talented prospects, so I think you should be keeping your eye on. But now I'm going to go into guys who are more subjective, who I feel like could be really good prospects, who I've liked their games, and somebody who just I personally feel like you should keep your eye on. The first player is Aleix Garrido, a midfielder from Barcelona playing for Spain. And when you hear that, it's just, oh, midfielder out of Barcelona. I think you generally know what player I'm talking about profile-wise. I think the things I want to add to that is that he's a really talented passer, threading balls into the final third, and he puts a really good weight on the pass. The weight on some of his final balls is just perfect. In addition, he's a lot quicker than I expected him to be. He's got a good burst of speed, who I feel like he could have a pretty good defensive work rate needed for him, and I could see him transitioning to the Barcelona first team pretty well. Now, he hasn't played much in the first team, which is why I'm not including him in the more objective top prospects, but he's a player who's had his contract extended at Barcelona. He's a midfielder out of La Masia. I think that he passed the eye test. He passes just the prestige of his position, and he's someone who I think could be a really talented player in the near future. Next is Cher Ndour, a midfielder from Benfica who's playing for Italy. And Ndour is somebody with a ton of athletic potential. I'm saying athletic potential because while he has a lot of speed and strength, he's a 6'3" player, and he kind of moves a little bit uncoordinated. Now, I think that he is growing into his body, and he is going to come along with that, but it's something that I feel like is more potential, and he's a player who's more of a high ceiling player rather than a really good player right now. I'm not sure if he'll even be a starter for Italy this tournament. But if he gets everything together, he could be a really solid box-to-box midfielder. With his athleticism, he'd be a great defensive presence, and he's been good on the ball. And going forward, he's a really good guy arriving in the box, arriving into that final third, and being a good goal threat. I think he could be a really talented box-to-box player for Italy in the future, and I think he's got a really high ceiling, one of the highest ceilings in this entire tournament. But he is somebody who is more potential. He might have a lower floor, but I think he could put it all together. Carlos Borges, a winger from Man City, is a really good prospect. I'm talking about him later because he hasn't played any pro games, but at youth level, he has been insane. He was the top scorer in the Premier League too. That really good winger that I mentioned would be good for him to combine with Ribeiro, and just he's kind of has a wow factor to him. He's got a ton of speed and is a really good dribbler, and obviously his end product is there. Man City's actually been pretty good at pushing through young players as of late, so I think there's a ton of reason to be excited about him. He's been linked on loan to either Premier League teams fighting relegation or Championship teams pushing for promotion, so that seems to be about his level at the moment, which is very good. Now again, it's hard to really gauge how good he is at the moment, because he hasn't played much professionally. He hasn't played at all professionally, I should say, but things are looking really good, and I think Borges is someone you should keep your eye on. Then there's Kacper Urbanski, an attacking midfielder from Poland who's playing for Bologna in Serie A. He hasn't played too much professionally, but from what I've seen from him, he looks like a really talented player. I think the main thing for him is his creativity. Just such a fun attacking player to watch. Just can pull out a ton of crazy moves, and his technical ability is there. When you have a player like that for a nation like Poland, who hasn't produced too many great technical players, I think he's definitely someone to keep your eye on. In addition, his defending is coming a long way. I've said attacking midfielder, he's actually played a good bit deeper sometimes, and he might end up playing as more of a 8 as opposed to more of a 10. So I think he's someone to keep your eye on, a really talented prospect for Poland. Now we're on to the teams who didn't have anybody who I'd consider to be a real top prospect: Norway, Iceland, and Malta. These are teams that I'm still going to talk about their top players, but I don't feel like there's anybody truly great in these sides. But I want to talk about every team. Norway's a team that I was actually very excited to talk about going into this. I was looking at their side going, oh, Antonio Nusa looks like a really good player. Andres Schjelderup is a top prospect. And then I even have somebody like an Isaac Hansen Aron from Manchester United. This is a very good group of players from Norway. But none of them are on the roster, and I don't really know why. I know Nusa was involved with Norway's U21 team, but there have been several players who have played in both the U20 World Cup and the U21s who are involved in this tournament. Schjelderup, maybe he's training with Benfica's first team. I guess that's the explanation that I'd give. There's one or two other Benfica players who aren't involved in this team who I'd expect, but I could rationally explain them not being on the team. And then with Hansen Aron, he's not near Manchester United's first team. Maybe they're working out a loan move for him, but I don't really understand why any of those guys are uninvolved with this tournament. And honestly, Norway is not in the greatest situation right now, despite a lot of really good players in their federation. It might be deserved to talk about Norway on its own, but with that out of the way, let's get into some of the top prospects available for Norway. The top prospect here for Norway, I'd have to say, is Nikolai Hopland. He's a center back who's very comfortable on the ball, both at dealing with presses and making good passes from deep. In addition, he's a pretty good athlete, very quick. But he is 6'1", which isn't huge for a center back, and at his age, he has struggled a little bit with physicality in the Norwegian league. Now, again, though, that is just with age. You'd expect him to get stronger, but the level of competition that he has been playing isn't great. But again, you can only play the players in front of you. And I think his on-ball ability has been pretty strong, and I have liked him as a prospect and someone to keep your eye on for Norway. One more Norwegian player is Alwande Roaldsoy, a defensive midfielder from Atalanta. And he hasn't played in the first team at all, but from what I've seen from him in the Norway under-19 team, especially in their game against France, I've really liked him. He's a pretty quick player and always in the right position defensively, and pretty good on the ball. In addition, in the Italian youth front, he's scored a surprising amount of goals, so he might be playing a bit further up the field. But I like him in that defensive midfield position. I don't think he's like a can't-miss prospect or anything, but I think he's got a lot of good traits to him, and he could end up being a pretty solid player for Norway in the future. Iceland is another nation who I had a couple ideas of who to talk about going into this, but neither player are on the team. Kristinn Halaisen has graduated to Iceland's senior squad. He's been with their senior team in the most recent window, so he hasn't been available for the U19 team. And Idor Gudjonsson's son is unavailable for this as well. From what I could find, he was originally on the squad, but had to be replaced, I'd assume due to injury. I say I assume because the article was in Icelandic, and it really didn't translate well, so I'm not sure. If I had to pick a good prospect from Iceland, it'd be Johannes Bjarnason, who's been playing in Iceland. He's had a little bit of a spell in Sweden. He followed his father, a former professional player there. It didn't work out too well for him. From what I can see, he at least didn't make many first-team appearances. And now he's back playing in Iceland. And From what I can tell, pretty good athlete, somewhat big player, nearly 6 feet tall, good at running around, and pretty good technically. Not a can't miss prospect or anything, but I feel like he's a solid player coming out of Iceland and might be someone to keep your eye on for this tournament. Last and least, we have Malta, the host of this tournament. And I think if I had to pick two players to talk about from them, I'm going to go with their two strikers, Basil Tuma and Alfie Bridgman. Both have made pro appearances in the EFL Cup. It should be said that neither have really gotten too close to their first team, though. Bridgman went out on loan to Step 3 in non-league, where he was able to come up with 6 goals, which, I mean, hey, he could be a good player for #United. Basil Tuma looks like he actually has some pretty good speed to him, and I think he could be a pretty solid player. He's from Reading, and I think he might have a little bit there. If there's someone to keep your eye on from Malta, it's definitely Basil Tuma. Alfie Bridgman's another decent goal scorer, though. One more player from Malta I want to talk about is a player that I've talked about before, Tristan Viviani. He's an American dual national who I actually talked about in a college video that I do where I talk about the top American prospects heading into college. And from that, I said he was a pretty good left back prospect. I think I had him as one of my top prospects altogether in that video. Pretty good defensively, I thought, in my opinion. I think he actually would do better. He's only 6 foot tall, but I think he'd do better if he transitioned to be a full-time left center back. I think he'd do very well in that position, but going forward, he's got a pretty good dribbling. I think his crossing needs to improve, and because of that, I think with his on-ball ability, him being a center back would probably help him out a lot, but he's still a top prospect at left back. And I feel like I should say, I'm still doing that college stuff. I'm still doing that. I'm scouting a lot for it, and if you want to see some scouting for that, I might try doing like live streams of me scouting those. It's something I haven't tried before, but I'm putting a lot of time into that, so it could be something fun to do. Hang on, do that. That's going to be my contribution to the American game right now. I'm going to be taking a break from U.S. soccer. I think that was made pretty clear by me not talking about the Gold Cup at all. But yeah, with the appointment of Berhalter coming back, I invested a lot of time into this team, and I don't think those investments are going to be paying off. So I'm going to be de-investing. I'm still going to be talking about those prospects because I think that's fun talking about the future of the squad. But for the senior team, I'm going to be taking a break talking about them. But yeah, that's all I really have to talk about. And let me know if you'd like to see me live stream scouting those prospects. I don't think I'd be able to show any of those games on screen because of copyright stuff like that. But it'd be fun to hang out and do that. Get some extra opinions. And yeah, that's all I have to talk about. See ya.